October 21, 2019, 5:17 p.m., Fort Collins, Colorado. Rush hour presses on College Avenue as bus 12 hums past brick storefronts and elm shade. In the third row, above the floor vent, 22-year-old Ava Reed watches her reflection hold its breath. What happened to Ava Reed? 5 years later, a sealed box will drag that question into daylight. Tonight begins with a noise so slight most ears would forgive it and move on. Something small fell, and the city swallowed the sound. Martin Cole trusted procedure more than luck. 58, Union jacket zipped high, he knew every shimmy in this coach. He called stops clean and watched the mirror the way a mechanic listens to a misfire. Calm, patient, exact. The passengers were adults with shifts and classes, talk dropping to the floor and out the doors. Ava stayed. She rode the curve onto College like a secret trying not to spill. 2 weeks in town had taught her the art of disappearing without leaving. She answered when spoken to, a soft thank you when he freed a stuck ramp, then retreated behind distance. Her hands hovered near her canvas bag, away, back again, as if remembering something better hidden. The clink came by the municipal building. Not a coin. Not a bolt. Plastic on metal. In the mirror Martin caught her shoulder hitch, her hand vanished toward the vent, her eyes cut up in a fast apology to the glass. He eased to the curb, opened the doors, and watched her step into the wash of traffic, chin tucked, mouth tight. The sound followed him through 2 more stops like a gnat that knew his name. End of route meant ritual. Bay for barometer. Walk the aisle. Collect what the day shed. Third row. Knees protesting, he reached under the seat. Cool grate. Then something smooth that did not belong to engines. He worked it free. A pink blister pack, heat warped, foil popped where thumbs had pressed. He wasn't a detective. He was a witness who understood chain of custody. He set the pack on the cushion, framed 3 photos with the vent and row marker, time-stamped them, and emailed transit safety and a college contact he had to Google. He didn't speculate where, when, what, signed his name, asked for guidance, and listened to the soda machine stutter in fluorescent quiet. He sealed the pack in a lost and found envelope, scrawled bus 12, row 3, floor vent, and slid it through the cage slot where forgotten things stack into second cities. Something left his fingers that maybe shouldn't have left. Tuesday night she boarded again. Few would notice how her eyes scanned the windows before she chose the third row, or how she flinched at a siren 2 blocks away. He said good evening and got a nod that missed him by an inch. At College she left quickly, turning into wind that hadn't started yet. He told himself adults carry private storms. Procedure would catch what he could not. On Wednesday her seat stayed empty. Thursday too. By Friday there was an email about overtime and a new dispatcher. His follow-up to the College bounced to an unattended inbox. He drove into Sunset with a question riding shotgun, knuckles pale on the wheel. 3 weeks later the cage audit came up short. His envelope wasn't where paperwork swore it should be. The clerk shrugged at umbrellas and scarves. Paper migrates, she said. Labels fall. He asked for a signature and got a log with a line that faded mid-surname. That night the room learned his breathing, and the noise on that curve learned a new trick. It returned. 5 years is long enough for paint to peel and doubt to root. It is also long enough for a tiny sound to grow teeth. In 2024, a sealed box will open under a stubborn pair of hands, and the question he tried to file away will lean forward and speak. But on this October night, there was only a clink on a curve, a driver at the end of a route, and a seat that would not forget who had warmed it. 5 days later, her place stayed empty, and silence grew teeth. The email about a surplus auction read like junk, but Martin Cole kept it anyway. By spring 2024, he had a habit of keeping small things that most people delete. Route maps folded to the size of matchbooks, bus numbers on sticky notes, a photo of a pink blister pack taken 5 years earlier that he never managed to move out of an old phone. The auction drew him back to the maintenance yard on Hickory Street on a Saturday that smelled like cut pine and hot rubber. Retired drivers haggled over seat cushions and radios. Mechanics joked about how long a coach could run on stubbornness alone. Martin wasn't there to buy. He was there to look one more time where he had left something he couldn't forgive. He asked the clerk for the lost and found archive, and she pointed a thumb without looking up. A chain-link cage squatted behind a row of retired ticket kiosks, its lock scuffed and lazy. Inside, second cities of forgotten lives leaned into each other, lunch pails, scarves, crutches, a prosthetic hand that would not let go of its own strap. He found the shelf labeled 2019. Dust, tape, marker bled to gray. The third box down had a split along one corner and a strip of newer tape bridging old adhesive. That detail stopped him. Tape told time. Someone had opened this after the year it claimed. He slid the box out, set it on a drum of degreaser, and peeled the tape back. Envelopes with the transit logo lay in a stack, each stamped with a route number and date. He didn't have to hunt. Bus 12, row 3, floor vent sat on top, his handwriting steady and ashamed. Inside, the blister pack, pink, heat-warped, foil popped, was exactly as his photo remembered it. But there was more. A thin, white access card, unmarked except for a ghosted green stripe, lay under the envelope flap as if it had been bedded there to ride along quietly. When he angled it toward the light, letters flickered through grime. Fossil Creek Park, Maint. Access. His pulse bumped. He looked around the empty aisle, listening for footsteps, and heard only the breath of the building. He photographed everything: box, flap, card, pack, shelf tag, the corner split and the tape seam, with the discipline of a man who had already learned what gets lost when you trust memory. Then he stepped outside into the clean Colorado sun and called a number he had saved without quite believing he would use: Detective Naomi Brooks, Fort Collins Police. She picked up on the second ring, voice brisk and human. He told her about the auction, the box, the card that shouldn't be there. She didn't lecture him about chain of custody or why citizens shouldn't rummage. She asked him not to touch anything else and to wait by Bay 4's roll-up door. "You still have the 2019 photos?" she asked. He did. "Good," she said. "Those dates will matter." While he waited, he did something he had put off for years. He scrolled through his contacts, found Miss Carter from the college, and hit call. Her hello broke on his name. He told her about the box and the card. She told him her version of 5 winters. The empty chair that kept showing up in her attendance logs, the complaint she submitted about a student who slept in the theater room because it was dark and quiet, the email she forwarded to a principal who left the district 2 months later. Regret is a fluent language. They spoke it without thinking. Naomi's unmarked sedan slid in tight and clean. She introduced herself with a handshake that was firm without trying to prove anything. He handed her the envelope and card without a speech. She photographed the box in situ, measured the tape seam, and bagged the card in a sleeve that snapped closed with the sound of decision. "Interesting thing about tape," she said, almost to herself. "You can date it by dust, by UV fade, by the adhesive's cross-linking. New tape on old boxes is a conversation someone had after hours." She asked permission to mirror the 2019 photos from his phone. He watched a technician connect a cable and pull time-stamped images like threads. In one, his hand fills the frame, knuckles oil dark, the pink pack bright as a siren. "If stories like this matter to you," Naomi said, returning the phone, "stay close. This is going to move." Across the yard, the auctioneer laughed at his own joke. A pair of collectors loaded a pale blue farebox into a pickup. Martin felt the hum of a bus that wasn't running, as if the past had kept its engine warm and was now checking mirrors. He asked Naomi if the access card meant the park was the next stop. She didn't confirm or deny. She pointed to the box instead. The split on this corner was reinforced after the original seal dried. Someone opened it, then tried to make it look like nobody had. That's not lazy. That's careful. He walked her through the curve on College Avenue, the clink that wouldn't leave his ears, the way Ava's shoulders collapsed when the siren stole her breath. She listened the way good mechanics listen, calm, patient, exact. Before she left, she took one last photo of the shelf tag. The date was smudged but legible. The handwriting on the receiving line wasn't the clerk's. It belonged to someone who had never worked the cage. If a box can keep a secret, this one had learned from a human teacher. Detective Naomi Brooks didn't romanticize parks. She treated Fossil Creek like any other workplace with trees, gates, lights, locks, logs. On Monday, she signed out the access records for 2019, the year the city migrated to a new card system and left behind a mess of exports no one read. The maintenance office smelled like lake water and old coffee. A manager named Hale produced a cardboard banker's box with color-coded binders and a thumb drive scotch-taped to a divider. The access card from the bus cage matched the system's format. 2 taps later, Naomi had an ID string, a serial number, and a pattern that didn't look like landscaping. 3 after-hours entries in October 2019. Same door. Same lock. 8:42 p.m., 10:03 p.m., 11:17 p.m. The card was registered to a seasonal tech who swore he'd lost it at a softball game. She walked the path to the maintenance shed with a CSU tech and a city locksmith. The building was a white rectangle at the park's quiet edge, set back from a line of cottonwoods that leaned as if keeping a secret. Daylight made everything look harmless. Harmless didn't last long. Naomi noted the scraped paint around the strike plate, a hairline crack in the jamb, a screw that had been replaced with 1/4 inch longer than its neighbors. The locksmith raised an eyebrow. Whoever lost the card had also learned the hardware. The CSU tech popped the faceplate off a dead camera over the door and found the power lead neatly unplugged and taped back to itself. Not vandalism. Preservation. Inside, the air held that blend of oil and dust found in every municipal storage room. Mowers dozed under tarps. A pegboard glinted with hooks that remembered tools no longer there. Naomi moved slow, hands in pockets, eyes doing the work her hands wanted. The floor told a story scuffed into concrete, drag marks angled toward a shelving unit that didn't quite touch the wall. A small rectangle on the floor was cleaner than the rest, a ghost outline of a container removed long ago. She marked it with a flag and kept moving. The CSU tech called her over to a wall outlet with an analog DVR input box screwed beside it, its model so old it belonged in a museum. The housing showed fingerprints in a dull halo, the kind left by hands that don't want to be remembered. Naomi didn't touch it. She photographed, then nodded for the tech to lift the unit into a static bag. Back at the desk, she asked for maintenance work orders for October 2019. Hale searched, then handed over a clipboard with duplicate forms and carbon smudges. The signature on 3 after-hours, alarm checks, looked rushed, almost printed. The initials on the approved by line were DW. Naomi didn't say the name that had been circling for days. She circled the forms instead and requested payroll and visitor logs for the same week. Hale winced. "We had a supervisor retire right after that quarter," he said. "Paperwork did what paperwork does." Naomi thanked him without agreeing. She spent her lunch in the cruiser, scrolling through archived news, construction permits, old city council minutes. Derek Whitmore's liquor store sat less than a mile from the south entrance to the park. A charity 5K used to run past it every fall. There were photos, sponsors' banners, team shirts, a happy crowd under trees the color of embers. In one, Derek grinned in a volunteer vest, arms slung around a park's employee in the same shade of neon. Connections don't convict. They make you look harder. The CSU lab woke the dead DVR with a bench supply and a prayer. The hard drive spun like a reluctant witness. There was no full video, but recovery software nibbled out frames that the unit had once buffered to a cache, a handful of stills that chose survival. The timestamps lined up with the access log. In the first, a sedan's rear quarter panel reflected the shed's doorway. In the second, the door gaped, and the edge of a cooler glowed white under the motion light. In the third, a blurred shoulder and a hat brim cut the corner of the frame. The hat had a logo scripted in cursive. Naomi printed the frames and laid them beside the access reports, the work orders, and the photo of the card from the bus cage. She called the city attorney and requested warrants for subscriber records tied to the shed's cell tower sector, limited to those 3 windows. She didn't want everyone. She wanted the phones that didn't belong. She called Martin last. Not for gossip, but because witnesses deserve to know when the dial moves. He answered fast, voice steady but thinner than the night she met him. She told him the access logs breathed and that the shed camera hadn't died. It had been silenced and still remembered a little. He exhaled and said her name like a thank you he hadn't learned how to give. After the call, he drove the route out of habit, turned onto College, and slowed at the curve even without passengers. He rolled down the window and listened. No clink. Just the soft push of tires over painted lines and the long sound a town makes when it has swallowed something it doesn't want to discuss. Naomi returned to the shed at dusk to watch how shadows fell, because predators favor edges and edges move. A jogger paused to retie a shoe and glanced at the building like it had once looked back. She made a note to canvas runners from the 5K team photos, to ask stupid questions that sometimes open brilliant doors. When she reached for the handle to leave, she saw it. Inside the latch, on the metal no one bothers to wipe, a single clear print turned sideways like a signature written in a hurry. Detective Naomi Brooks preferred to let documents talk first. She started with the sideways fingerprint she'd seen inside the latch, then built outward like spokes from a hub. CSU lifted it, ran it against city employee files, then state databases. It wasn't a clean hit, not at first. The lift carried dust and a faint smear of oil, as if the hand had closed the door after moving something heavy. A tech cleaned the image, normalized the contrast, and turned noise into ridges. By noon, the match returned not to a park worker, but to a man whose prints were on a liquor license application from 2018, Derek Whitmore. Naomi didn't jump at the obvious. She asked for elimination prints from every tech who'd ever serviced that door. She got them, cleared them, and then laid Derek's carded fingerprint beneath the lifted print like two lines crossing a truth that didn't want company. She drove to Laura Reed's apartment without lights or drama. The place was tidy in the way grief can be, everything squared, nothing warm. Laura opened the door like she expected a delivery that never comes. Her eyes registered Naomi's badge, then the name. And in that small recognition Naomi saw 5 winters that had not softened. The conversation began with courtesy and turned to the kind of honesty that only arrives when there's nothing left to guard. Laura said 2019 was a year of lists and alarms. Doctor appointments. A pregnancy in its final stretch. A partner who seemed helpful until helpfulness felt like surveillance. She admitted what she had never admitted out loud. She had asked Ava to stay the weeknights with Derek near the south entrance to the park because it was closer to campus and she thought the arrangement would cool tensions. It didn't. Ava became quieter. She took buses when she used to walk. She carried a canvas bag like it held either a map or a fuse. Naomi didn't ask why Laura hadn't called earlier. People don't move on schedules the law prefers. She asked for practical things instead. Any text threads from that month, any old calendars, any email confirmations for deliveries to Derek's store. Laura hesitated, then returned with a shoebox marked taxes. Inside were envelopes and a phone in a cracked blue case. It was Ava's second line, the one she used when her main phone filled up. The battery had swelled years ago, but the SIM still slept inside. Naomi bagged it, thanked Laura, and promised to return with answers she could defend. Back at the park, Naomi walked the route from the shed to the lot with a stopwatch and a curious mind. 15 seconds from door to car at a strong pace. 22 if someone carried a cooler. The DVR frame had shown a cooler edge, blown pale by a motion light that didn't care about guilt. She requested purchases from local stores for cooler models and fuel canisters around October 2019, then cross-checked that with Derek's business accounts. A recurring supply order pinged a small distributor off Mulberry Street every fall. The invoices named soda, ice, plastic cups. The pickup signature on one was a scrawl that resembled the approved by on the park's work orders. The shock in paperwork is never loud, but it accumulates. She met Martin at a diner with good coffee and a view of College Avenue bending toward the foothills. He looked like a man who had traded sleep for clarity and didn't know yet how to spend it. She told him about the print. He didn't say Derek's name. He said Ava's and then sat very still. Naomi slid a photocopy of the pink blister pack image across the table. "We recovered the lost and found box," she said, and watched color return to his face like a dawn that took its time. He apologized for not doing more in 2019. She stopped him. Guilt wouldn't build the case. Precision would. She asked him to write the route from memory, times, stops, delays, the rainstorm he remembered on a Thursday in late October that made traffic stack like chairs. He did. The times matched the access log in a way that felt less like probability and more like a hand closing a loop. The SIM card from the blue phone delivered a thin ledger of outgoing messages and a list of contacts with names swapped for nouns. One number labeled Southgate appeared 3 times in the week before Ava vanished. It belonged to a prepaid phone that had pinged a tower with a sector pointing directly at Fossil Creek Park. On the 3rd day, 5 minutes after the ping, the Southgate access card opened the maintenance door. Naomi didn't need a confession. She needed the last piece that turned weight into gravity. She returned to Laura with what she could legally share, then asked a question that felt cruel and necessary. Whether Ava had ever talked about leaving, not disappearing, but leaving, changing majors, changing cities, choosing distance over peace. Laura looked at the wall past Naomi's shoulder and nodded once like a person signing for a package she didn't order. She said Ava had circled a date on the calendar to move into campus housing and never told Derek. The move-in window overlapped with the week the shed door opened 3 times. Naomi stepped outside and called the city attorney to widen the warrants. She requested subscriber records for the prepaid, financials for the store, and security footage from a pharmacy where cooler-sized totes sat behind a counter in 2019. She pictured the shed, the latch, the sideways print, the pale edge of plastic under a motion light. Then she pictured what hadn't been found yet, the one thing that would either anchor everything or set it adrift again, because something had to be waiting for them where the park met the water. The warrant came back just after noon, crisp as fresh paper, and by late afternoon Detective Naomi Brooks stood again at the maintenance shed with a CSU field team, a city attorney's observer, and a locksmith whose hands spoke a language of hinges. The cottonwoods threw long bars of shadow over the white rectangle of a building, making the door look thinner than it was. Naomi logged time of entry, photographed the latch where the sideways print had lived, and nodded for the key. The lock turned with a tired click, like something that had learned obedience the hard way. Inside, the smell was concrete and oil and grass dried into silence. She moved the room in slow squares, eyes mapping edges, thresholds, places where a hurried person would rest a burden for 1 second. The shelving unit at the back still hovered an inch off the wall like a held breath. Naomi crouched and traced the line where its foot met dust. On one side the gray was even, on the other a pale rectangle glared back, as though a small container had once shielded the floor from time. She marked it with a paper flag and stepped aside. The CSU tech rolled a laser level across the concrete, watching bubbles and lines, then wrapped the slab with a rubber mallet in a patient code. The 4th strike answered different, 1 octave hollower, an echo under the echo. The locksmith set 2 suction cups and lifted the front edge of the shelf just enough to slip a gloved hand beneath. Fingertips brushed metal, caught a lip, paused. Naomi angled her flashlight low so light traveled the floor. A hairline seam appeared, no bigger than a pencil line. Not poured, the locksmith said softly. Set. He slid a thin pry under the seam and levered a square of concrete that was not concrete at all but resin textured to masquerade as it. Beneath lay a cubby the size of a banker's box. Air rose from it with the dry sweetness of enclosed years. Naomi didn't reach in. She narrated each step for the camera, then let the tech do the lifting. First came a heavy-duty tote bag, gray and scarred, the kind coolers travel in when they want to be invisible next to landscaping gear. Next, a folded strip of dark cloth with a corner stiff from old adhesive, not blood. She smelled alcohol, likely tape residue that had cured. At the bottom, a small ring with 2 keys and a key fob. Naomi held the ring to the light. The oval plastic tag read Laura in block letters long since dulled. The keys were for a 2013 sedan, a make and model registered to Ava Reed that Derek Whitmore had insured as an authorized driver. Shock in paperwork accumulates. Shock in a shallow compartment arrives all at once. Naomi bagged each item and logged them. The tote's side pocket yielded a receipt so pale it nearly gave up. Mulberry Street Pharmacy, October 19, 2019. A purchase of over-the-counter hormone tablets and electrolyte packets, paid cash, clerk ID 14. The clerk's initials matched those on a seasonal schedule Naomi had pulled that morning. The specificity didn't prove intent, it proved time. She breathed once and wrote the hour. Outside, A runner slowed to ask if the path would stay open at dusk. Naomi flashed a neutral smile and said they'd be done soon. The man hesitated, then volunteered a memory from late in the season years ago. Rain spit from the west, a couple arguing by the equipment bins, a cooler sliding in the wet and thumping off a wheel chalk. He remembered because the noise was wrong for weather. He remembered the man wore a hat with cursive script. Naomi thanked him and took his contact, the way you take a key you didn't know you needed. She called Martin and asked, gently, if he wanted to watch the search finish. He arrived with his Union jacket zipped high against wind that wasn't there and stood just inside the door as the techs worked. When the resin panel came free, he did not step closer. He stared at the clean square underneath and said, almost to himself, that the sound on the College Avenue curve had been a plastic-on-metal clink, not a coin, not a bolt. Naomi let that sentence settle into the room like a witness. Back on the bench outside, she arranged the day's finds in their bags like a sentence that would soon require verbs. The phone came last, unexpected, from a gap between studs behind the resin square, where a hand could tuck something if a shelf nudged the sheetrock just enough. It was a smartphone with a spidered screen and the case peeled at one corner. She didn't power it, she logged, bagged, and wrote the serial. A SIM sat in the tray, the smallest hinge holding the largest door. She looked at the lake beyond the trees and thought of how water keeps secrets by saying nothing. The locksmith resecured the panel and shelf. Naomi signed the scene closed, then called the lab and asked them to stand by for a priority extraction on a device that had learned to be very, very quiet. The lights slanted low on the shed's white paint, and the building finally looked like what it was, a box that had been told to behave. She pocketed her copy of the receipt, glanced once more at the key fob with Laura worn almost smooth, and felt the case shift another notch from doubt to gravity. What the phone remembered would decide whether the lake kept its peace or gave back its story. The phone did not light when they pressed the button. It yielded itself in stages, like a witness learning to trust. Sisu built a bridge of power and patience, pulled a volatile image, then a directory, then a slow river of fragments. First came a 17-second voice memo stamped October 21, 2019, 10:07 p.m. Wind skittered across a metal door. A hinge complained. A man's voice, not raised but tight, said, "We'll be done in 5. In the background, something slid, thumped once, and stopped. The file held no names, only pressure. Naomi Brooks played it twice, then set it aside before it swallowed the room. The photo reel held fewer pictures than it should have for a 22-year-old, which made the ones that survived matter more. A close shot of bus 12's third row, floor vent centered, taken at 5:19 p.m., 2 minutes after Ava Reed had stared at her reflection and held her breath. Another frame, later, showed a white rectangle of building under a motion light, a streak of rain caught in the glow. The metadata pinned it to the maintenance shed's corner at 10:03 p.m., the exact minute the access log had recorded an after-hours entry. Ava documented what scared her. She left a trail for someone to find if someone cared to look. Subscriber records on the prepaid labeled Southgate led nowhere human, but the tower maps didn't lie. The device lingered in a sector that sat on Fossil Creek like a hand. Traffic cameras did their quiet work too. One lens by the south exit had caught the tail of a 2013 sedan at 11:28 p.m. on the same night, its plate half seen, then sharpened by software into Laura Reed's number. A second camera 3 blocks away saw the sedan again with a different car 2 lengths back. The following vehicle's plate belonged to a liquor store owner on College Avenue, a man who liked Charity 5 Burmese chots and hats with cursive logos. Naomi didn't script a confrontation. She built a case. Search warrants landed. Detectives opened Derek Whitmore's office safe and found deposit slips, a volunteer badge from the park's fall event, and a baseball cap whose script matched the blurred brim from the fossilized DVR frame. The brim carried a dust not native to retail rooms, silicate-rich, with the same trace pollen the shed accumulated each October when the cottonwoods shed their warnings. His hands had been where the city kept its tools, and his prints had turned a latch sideways like a Rush signature. He said it was a misunderstanding. He said he'd checked an alarm once to help a friend and borrowed a card lost at a softball field. The paperwork said he'd checked 3, and the access logs didn't consider him a friend. Naomi notified Laura first. She told her what they had and what they did not have. She asked for permission to say Ava's name in court filings in a way that made her more than a case number. Laura agreed, then sat very still. When she spoke, she didn't ask for revenge. She asked whether the truth had enough weight to hold if she and Martin told it straight. Naomi said yes and meant it the only way she could, with evidence that forced its own gravity. Divers tested the lake in calibrated sweeps. Sonar traced old furniture, a bicycle, a shopping cart that looked like a ghost of a choice. They found no car, no cash, nothing that would give the town a point to mourn. The shed, not the water, had been the engine. In the small square beneath the resin, they had already pulled what mattered. A tote that never meant to be cold, a receipt pale with time, a key fob with Laura rubbed almost smooth, and a phone that remembered when asked the right way. The absence on the lake wasn't mercy. It was a different kind of message. Trial calendars filled like ledgers. The city attorney paired charges to what would stand: unlawful imprisonment, evidence tampering, obstruction. The 17-second memo became a spine around which other bones could find their place. The traffic cams were the arms. The access logs were the ribs. The latch print was the hand. The pharmacist from Mulberry Street remembered a young woman paying cash and asking for electrolyte packets as if training for a race that had no route map. Ms. Carter took the stand to read the last text Ava sent from the blue phone to her second line. "Moving this week. I'll be okay. Don't tell him." Martin testified about a clink on a curve and a blister pack he had photographed because he didn't know what else a civilian could do. Derek watched the photos slide across a courtroom monitor without blinking. He asked for a moment to speak with counsel, and when he returned he talked about mistaken times and honest favors and how charity work creates strange footprints. He never said Ava's name. He never asked where she went. He asked why everyone cared now when no one did then. Naomi didn't answer. The evidence did. When the day ended, Martin stepped out into cool air and looked down College Avenue, the bend he had driven 1,000 times. He counted breaths he didn't have to hold anymore, then drove home by habit and turned his radio off to hear the town think. Laura didn't go to the lake. She sat with Miss Carter at the diner and let the coffee go cold while they wrote a list of things Ava loved that had nothing to do with fear, as if naming them could make a space where a life might want to return. Naomi filed her reports, signed out her exhibits, and stood in the parking lot a minute longer than necessary, watching dusk take the edges off a day that had refused to round itself. What stays is smaller than we expect. A picture taken at 5:19. A print turned sideways. A cooler's edge glowing under a cheap light. A driver who stopped filing away his doubt. A mother who chose facts over fantasies. An investigator who kept listening after the audio ended. People like to think justice is loud. Most days it sounds like paper and breath. Lesson: we don't have control over every ending, but we do control whether we pay attention. Small, careful acts, taking a photo, saving a receipt, making a second call, turn suspicion into shape. Systems miss things. People don't have to. If you think something's wrong, write it down, tell it twice, and keep a copy. Quiet persistence is how lost stories find the door.